I was hospitalized for severe pneumonia for 3 weeks, and when I finally came home, I found my husband Paxton had moved his girlfriend Agnes into our house. He'd already replaced my clothes, photos, even my favorite armchair. Too bad he didn't check the property deed that listed only my name. The look on their faces when the police escorted them out is something I'll never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The taxi pulled up to our Victorian-style home, the one Paxton and I had saved for years to buy. It stood proud against the evening sky, its familiar silhouette, bringing tears to my eyes after weeks in the sterile hospital environment. I'd fought through a near-fatal case of pneumonia that had turned septic, my body battling an infection that doctors weren't sure I'd survive. But I had survived. I was finally coming home. The driver helped me with my small bag, and I noticed he gave me a strange look when I mentioned how good it felt to be home. Looking back, I should have recognized his expression for what it was: pity. My hand trembled as I pushed the key into the lock, expecting Paxton to throw the door open before I could turn it. We'd been married for 8 years, and he always seemed to sense when I was near, opening the door with that boyish smile that had made me fall for him a decade ago. But the door remained closed. My key turned, and I pushed it open to find the entryway dark. "Paxton?" I called out, my voice still raspy from the ventilator tube that had been removed just days before. No answer. The silence felt wrong, oppressive somehow. I flipped on the light switch. For a moment, I thought I'd entered the wrong house. Where my grandmother's antique console table once stood was now a sleek, minimalist piece I'd never seen before. The walls, once adorned with our wedding photos and travel mementos, now displayed abstract paintings in colors Paxton had always said he hated. A strange scent hung in the air, floral but with notes of vanilla and amber. Not my perfume. My heart pounded as I moved deeper into the house, each step revealing more changes. The living room had been completely rearranged, my beloved reading chair nowhere to be seen. In its place stood a chaise lounge in a shade of burgundy that clashed with everything I would have chosen. On the coffee table sat 2 wine glasses, one with a clear lipstick mark in a shade I'd never wear. "Paxton?" I called again, louder this time, my voice cracking with the effort. That's when I heard it, giggling from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable low rumble of my husband's laughter. The sound that once brought me comfort now sent ice through my veins. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my legs weak from both illness and shock. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, pretend I hadn't seen any of this. But I couldn't. This was my home. The home I'd found when house hunting. The home I'd convinced Paxton was perfect for us despite its needed renovations. The home I'd paid for with my inheritance when Paxton's credit score threatened our mortgage application. The laughter upstairs stopped abruptly, replaced by whispers and the creak of our bedroom floor, the one that always announced someone's presence, no matter how quietly they tried to move. Then footsteps, hurried and heavy, approaching the stairs. Paxton appeared at the top, wearing only pajama bottoms, his face transforming from annoyed to shocked as our eyes met. "Dorothy?" His voice was higher than normal, strained. "You're home. Not welcome home, or I've missed you, or any of the things a husband should say to a wife who'd nearly died. Just, you're home," spoken like an accusation. "I am," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who's upstairs with you, Paxton?" Before he could answer, a woman appeared behind him. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s to my 42 years. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves around a heart-shaped face, and she wore one of Paxton's t-shirts, the one I'd given him last Christmas with our favorite band's logo. It hung to mid-thigh over her slender legs. "Oh!" she exclaimed, eyes widening. "You must be Dorothy." She said my name with familiarity, as if we were old acquaintances. "I'm Agnes. Paxton said you were still in the hospital. The casual way she stood there, in my home, wearing my husband's clothes, speaking my name, it was surreal. I looked between them, noting how Paxton shifted slightly to stand closer to her, a protective gesture he once reserved for me. Clearly, I'm not still in the hospital, I said, my voice now eerily calm. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder, more focused. What I'd like to know is why this woman is in our home, Paxton, and why our house looks like this. Paxton ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd once found endearing. Dorothy, I can explain. I was going to talk to you about this, but the doctors said your recovery would be complicated, that stress could cause setbacks. So instead of telling me you were having an affair, you moved her into our home? Redecorated? Removed my things? Each question came out sharper than the last. Where are my clothes? My books? The photos of my parents? Agnes looked uncomfortable now, glancing at Paxton as if expecting him to handle this inconvenient situation. He stepped down a few stairs, stopping when he saw something in my expression. Dorothy, please. You're still recovering. Let's discuss. This calmly. Agnes and we reconnected while you were ill. I didn't plan for this to happen, but… Reconnected? I interrupted. You know each other? Agnes smiled nervously. We dated in college, before you. We ran into each other at the hospital cafeteria when I was visiting my mother. Paxton was there for you, of course. Of course. How considerate of my husband to visit me in the hospital before returning to the arms of his college girlfriend. Dorothy, Paxton continued, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when trying to manage difficult clients at his architectural firm. You've been away for almost a month. The doctors weren't even sure you'd recover fully. I was lonely, and Agnes was there, and things just progressed. Progressed to the point where you've erased me from our home? I asked, looking around, at the unfamiliar space that had once been my sanctuary. Paxton had the decency to look ashamed, but only briefly. I was going to tell you once you were stronger. I've been talking to a lawyer about the house, about a fair division of assets. Lawyer? The word felt like a slap. You consulted a lawyer while I was fighting for my life? It seemed practical, Agnes interjected, as if her opinion mattered here. Paxton said you're always pragmatic about these things. I stared at this woman who thought she knew me, who stood in my home speaking about me as if we'd had conversations, as if Paxton's characterization of me gave her any insight into who I really was. Get out, I said quietly. Dorothy, be reasonable, Paxton started. Get out. My shout echoed through the modified house, stronger than I thought possible with my weakened lungs. Both of you, now. Agnes retreated upstairs, presumably to dress, while Paxton remained, his expression hardening. This is my house too, Dorothy. You can't just order me to leave. A strange calm settled over me then, replacing the rage and hurt. Actually, Paxton, I can, and I will. I reached for my phone, still weak but fueled by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. As I dialed, Paxton's expression changed from defiance to confusion. Who are you calling? I held up one finger, silencing him as the line connected. Yes, hello. I need police assistance at 1542 Oakwood Drive. My name is Dorothy Montgomery. I've returned home from the hospital to find unauthorized individuals have taken residence in my property. Paxton's face paled. Dorothy, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. I continued speaking to the dispatcher, ignoring him. Yes, thank you. I'll wait outside. As I ended the call, Paxton stormed toward me. You can't do this. This is my home too. I smiled then, a small, sad smile that seemed to unnerve him more than my anger had. That's where you're wrong, Paxton. If you'd checked the property deed before moving your girlfriend in, you'd have remembered one very important detail, Confusion on his face was almost comical. Almost. The house is solely in my name. Always has been. We talked about adding you to the deed after the renovation loans were paid off, but we never got around to it. Remember? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The blood drained from his face as recognition dawned. He did remember. I could see it in his eyes. We'd discussed it just last year, but with one thing and another, the paperwork had never been filed. "You can't do this," he repeated, but the certainty had left his voice. "I already have," I replied, turning toward the door. "I suggest you and Agnes pack quickly. The police should be here soon." The first 7 years of my marriage to Paxton felt like living in a dream. We met at an architecture exhibit where I was photographing the event for the local newspaper, and he was one of the featured young designers. His passion when he spoke about creating spaces that improved people's lives captivated me. He gestured with his hands as he explained his vision, his eyes bright with enthusiasm, completely unaware of how charming he was in his rumpled blazer and mismatched socks. After the exhibit closed, I found him sitting alone on a bench, sketching the building's facade in a worn notebook. I approached under the pretense of getting a final quote, but really, I just wanted to keep talking to him. We ended up at a nearby coffee shop that turned into dinner that turned into a walk along the river until sunrise. By the time we parted ways the next morning, I knew something special had begun. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Paxton was romantic in unexpected ways, leaving architectural sketches of places we'd visited tucked into my bag, planning dates around historic buildings, teaching me to see the beauty in structures I'd passed 1,000 times without noticing. He proposed 6 months later on the rooftop of the city's oldest skyscraper, presenting me with a ring he'd designed himself. We married at the Botanical Gardens the following spring, surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms and the people we loved most. My parents, though initially concerned about the speed of our relationship, had come to adore Paxton. "He looks at you like you're the blueprint for his happiness," my father whispered as he walked me down the aisle. Our early married life was simple but joyful. We rented a small apartment downtown, close to both our jobs. Every weekend became an adventure, exploring nearby towns, visiting architectural landmarks, or simply wandering through neighborhood open houses, dreaming of our future home. Paxton was starting his own firm, and I had begun transitioning from newspaper photography to freelance work that allowed me more creative freedom. We complemented each other perfectly. Where I was practical and organized, Paxton was creative and spontaneous. I handled our finances and day-to-day logistics, while he brought imagination and excitement into our lives. We rarely argued. Any disagreements were resolved with calm, discussions that usually ended with both of us feeling heard and respected. When we discovered the Victorian house on Oakwood Drive, it was Paxton who first saw its potential. The house needed significant renovations, but he could envision what it could become. I was more hesitant, concerned about the cost and the work involved, but his enthusiasm was infectious. We spent evenings planning each room, sketching possibilities, and calculating budgets. The only obstacle was financing. Paxton's new firm was still establishing itself, and his credit had taken hits from student loans and initial business expenses. When the bank hesitated to approve our mortgage, I suggested, using my inheritance from my grandmother, my name alone went on the deed for simplicity, with plans to add Paxton once the renovation loans were paid off. He kissed me when the papers were signed. "You're making our dream possible," he said. "I'll make this house everything you deserve." And, for a while, he did. We spent weekends tearing down wallpaper, refinishing floors, and painting rooms. Paxton designed built-in bookshelves for my photography books and created a darkroom in a converted closet where I could develop my film photographs. I surprised him with a home office that caught perfect northern light for his drafting table. The house became a physical manifestation of our partnership, each room holding memories of our laughter, occasional frustrations, and shared accomplishments. Our friends envied what we had. "You two are disgustingly perfect together," my best friend Kayla would tease during dinner parties in our gradually transformed dining room. Paxton would always respond by putting his arm around me, pulling me close, and saying, "Just lucky, I guess." We discussed having children, though we were in no rush. Paxton wanted to ensure his firm was stable first, and I had photography exhibitions I wanted to pursue. But we talked about it often, how we'd convert the upstairs study into a nursery, the kind of parents we hoped to be, even potential names. It wasn't a matter of if, just when. Our 5th anniversary, Paxton surprised me with a trip to Europe, a tour of architectural wonders he'd always wanted to show me. We walked the streets of Paris, Barcelona, and Rome, hand in hand, taking photographs and sketching buildings. In Florence, standing on the Ponte Vecchio at sunset, Paxton looked at me with such tenderness that it took my breath away. "Building a life with you," he said, "is the greatest design project I'll ever undertake." Those words stayed with me, a perfect encapsulation of what our marriage felt like, a collaborative creation we were building together, brick by brick, day by day. When Paxton's firm finally landed its first major commercial project in our 7th year of marriage, we celebrated with champagne on our back porch, watching fireflies illuminate the garden we'd planted together. Success meant longer hours for him, but I supported his dream wholeheartedly. I brought dinner to his office on late nights, massaged his shoulders when he came home exhausted, and listened attentively as he talked through design challenges. "I couldn't do any of this without you," he told me repeatedly. "You're my foundation." I believed him. I believed in us. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No relationship is. But it was strong. We had built a home together, supported each other's careers, and created a life that felt secure and full of love. Even when Paxton grew, more distant as his work demands increased, I never doubted the fundamental soundness of our relationship. That's what makes betrayal so devastating. It doesn't just destroy your present, it rewrites your past. Every memory becomes suspect. Every sweet word, questioned. Every moment of happiness, scrutinized for signs you might have missed. But sitting in that taxi, heading home from the hospital, I had no idea that the life I was returning to had already been dismantled, that the man who had promised to build a future with me had already begun construction on a different one with someone else. I had no idea that the foundation I thought we stood on had cracked beyond repair. All I felt was gratitude to be alive, excitement to be home, and love for the husband I believed was waiting for me. Looking back, the changes in Paxton were subtle. At first, so gradual that I convinced myself they weren't happening at all. It started around the time his architecture firm landed the Westfield Commercial Center project, the breakthrough he'd been working toward for years. I was genuinely happy for him. This was what we had sacrificed for, all those late nights and working weekends. But success changed him in ways I wasn't prepared for. The first thing I noticed was his schedule. The occasional late night became the norm. "Just until the project is finished," he'd say, kissing me absently as he left before dawn and returned well after I'd gone to bed. I'd wake up to find his side of the bed untouched, discover him asleep on the couch downstairs, his clothes smelling of unfamiliar cologne that he'd explain away as the client's. Then came the dinner parties and networking events, suddenly essential for his career, but I was rarely invited. "It's all shop talk," he'd tell me. "You'd be bored." When I reminded him that I'd photographed architectural events for years and could certainly hold my own in a conversation about design, he'd smile that new smile, slightly condescending, slightly distant, and say, "It's different now, Dorothy. These are potential investors, not art enthusiasts." I started finding receipts for restaurants we'd never visited together, charges for hotel bars downtown when he'd claimed to be working late at the office. When questioned, his explanations were always ready, always plausible, always just slightly impatient, as if my inquiries were tedious interruptions to his important thoughts. The client wanted to meet somewhere central. The hotel has the best whiskey selection for impressing investors. We needed somewhere quiet to discuss the revisions. Our conversations, once flowing and intimate, became perfunctory exchanges of information. He stopped asking about my photography projects, my exhibitions, my day. When I'd ask about his work, he'd give vague answers about making progress or handling complications before changing the subject or remembering an urgent email he needed to send. One evening, I prepared his favorite meal, braised short ribs that took hours to cook, hoping to reconnect over dinner. He texted at the last minute, "Meeting running late. Don't wait up." I sat alone at our dining table, the food growing cold, and felt the distance between us stretching into something I could no longer ignore. The physical changes were noticeable too. Paxton started going to a gym, buying new clothes, sleeker, more expensive than his former casual style. He changed his hairstyle, began using products I didn't recognize. When I complimented how good he looked, his response was telling. "Well, I'm representing the firm now. I need to look the part. Not thank you, not I want to look good for you." His appearance was for others now, not for us. Our intimacy suffered. His touches became rare, perfunctory when they happened at all. I tried initiating, only to be met with excuses about stress or exhaustion. One night, after another rejection, I asked directly if something was wrong between us. "Not everything is about us, Dorothy," he said, his tone making me feel small and selfish. "This project could make my career. I need to focus." I backed away, telling myself it was temporary, that once the Westfield project was complete, we'd find our way back to each other. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something fundamental had shifted. Then came the weekend trip he canceled. We'd planned months in advance to visit the coastal town where we'd spent our honeymoon. 2 days before, Paxton announced he couldn't go. A critical client meeting had been scheduled. "Can't you reschedule?" I asked. "We've been looking forward to this for months." "This is how business works, Dorothy," he replied, that new edge of condescension in his voice. "Opportunities don't wait for convenient timing." I went alone, sending him photos of our favorite spots, receiving brief, delayed responses that felt like afterthoughts. On the second evening, I called his office to share a particularly beautiful sunset, thinking he might be working late. His assistant, Milton, sounded confused. "Paxton? He left early today. Said he had personal matters to attend to." My stomach tightened. "Oh, did he mention what?" "No." Milton hesitated. "But he's been leaving early most Fridays lately." "I assumed. You knew." I thanked him and hung up, the sunset forgotten as I stared at my phone. Paxton had been leaving work early on Fridays for months, while telling me he was working late. Where was he going? Who was he with? The questions crowded my mind, but I pushed them away. There could be reasonable explanations. I didn't want to be the suspicious, insecure wife. When I returned home, I didn't confront him. Instead, I watched more carefully, collected more inconsistencies. The text messages he'd angle away from my view. The sudden password changes on his phone. The way he'd step outside to take certain calls. The mysterious weekend work emergencies that seemed to resolve themselves before I could offer to bring him dinner at the office. One morning, I found a long dark hair on his jacket, too dark to be mine. When I held it up questioningly, he barely glanced at it. "Probably from the new intern," he said, taking the jacket and brushing it off. "The office has been packed with the design team working overtime." It was a reasonable explanation, but the ease with which it came, the lack of surprise or concern in his voice, it felt rehearsed, as if he'd anticipated the question. The final warning came from Kayla, my closest friend, who worked at a gallery downtown. She called me one afternoon, her voice cautious. Dorothy, I saw Paxton yesterday. At the gallery? I asked, surprised. Paxton hadn't mentioned visiting. No. A pause. At Riverfront Restaurant. He was with a woman. They looked close. My heart constricted. Maybe a client? What did she look like? Younger. Dark hair. Very polished looking. They were in a corner booth. He had his arm around her chair. I gripped the phone tighter. Did he see you? No, I didn't approach them. I wasn't sure what to do. Another pause. Dorothy, I'm sorry, but it didn't look like a business meeting. I thanked her, assuring her she'd done the right thing by telling me, while my mind raced through possibilities. A misunderstanding, a colleague, a relative I hadn't met. But none of these explanations felt true. That night, when Paxton came home, earlier than usual, as if to preempt any suspicion, I almost confronted him. The questions burned on my tongue. But fear held me back. Fear of the answers, fear of what they would mean for our marriage, our home, the life we'd built. Instead, I said, nothing, watching him move around our kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed they were getting away with something. And in my silence, in my reluctance to face what was becoming increasingly obvious, I became complicit in the unraveling of our marriage. I told myself I needed more evidence before making accusations. I told myself things would improve after the Westfield project. I told myself many things, none of which addressed the growing certainty that Paxton was living a life separate from ours, a life that included someone else. 2 days later, I collapsed at a photo shoot. Pneumonia, the doctor said. Severe. And as they admitted me to the hospital, my last thought before the fever took hold was that Paxton might not even notice I was gone. I've always believed that truth reveals itself when you're ready to see it, not when you want to. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon, 1 week into my hospital stay. The pneumonia had hit me harder than anyone expected. What began as a persistent cough rapidly deteriorated into a struggle to breathe. By the time I checked myself into the emergency room, the infection had spread to both lungs. The doctors admitted me immediately, their concerned expressions telling me more than their carefully chosen words. The first few days passed in a blur of antibiotics, oxygen masks, and fitful sleep. Paxton visited briefly, looking uncomfortable in the hospital environment, always finding a reason to leave early. I've got to get back to the office, he'd say, or I should let you rest. His visits grew shorter, the gaps between them longer. On that Tuesday, I was feeling marginally better. The fever had broken, and though breathing still hurt, I no longer felt like I was drowning with every inhale. I asked the nurse for my phone, wanting to check emails and perhaps send Paxton a message. When she brought it, I discovered it had died days ago. No problem, she said cheerfully. We can charge it at the nurse's station. She returned it an hour later, and I settled back against my pillows, grateful for the connection to the outside world. There were dozens of messages, colleagues asking about assignments I'd missed, friends wondering why I'd gone silent, my gallery liaison concerned about a deadline. But nothing from Paxton. Not a single text asking how I was feeling or when. I might come home. I called him, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. Finally, I called his office. Montgomery Design, a familiar voice answered. Milton, it's Dorothy. Dorothy, his voice brightened. How are you? We've been worried. I'm improving, thanks. Is Paxton there? I can't reach him on his cell. A pause. He's not in today. Or yesterday, actually. Milton hesitated. He said he needed to handle some personal matters. Personal matters. While I lay in a hospital bed fighting a severe infection, my husband was handling personal matters that apparently didn't include checking on me. Did he mention what kind of personal matters? I tried to keep my voice neutral. Another pause. longer this time. Dorothy, I'm not sure I should be the one to tell you this. My heart began to race, setting off one of the monitors beside my, don't tell me what, Milton. He's been distracted lately, coming in late, leaving early. There have been calls from someone named Agnes, a lot of calls. The name hit me like a physical blow. Agnes. I'd heard it before, in fragments of conversations Paxton thought I couldn't hear, in muffled phone calls behind closed doors. Do you know who she is? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She came to the office once, Milton said reluctantly. Young, stylish. Paxton introduced her as a potential client, but he trailed off. But what? The way they looked at each other, it didn't seem professional. The monitor beside me beeped more insistently as my pulse quickened. A nurse poked her head in, frowning at the readings, but I waved her away. Thank you for telling me, Milton, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I'm sorry, Dorothy. You deserve to know. After hanging up, I sat motionless, the phone clutched in my hand. All the small inconsistencies, the excuses, the growing distance, they crystallized into a reality I could no longer deny. Paxton was having an affair. With trembling fingers, I opened his contact on my phone and tapped on Find My Friends. Months ago, we'd enabled location sharing, a practical decision for coordinating our busy schedules. He'd never disabled it, probably assuming I wouldn't check. The map loaded, showing a pulsing blue dot at an unfamiliar address across town. I took a screenshot, then opened a browser and searched for the location. It was an upscale apartment complex called the Riverview. Sleek, modern, exactly the kind of architecture Paxton admired. Acting on instinct, I called the complex's leasing office. Riverview Apartments, how can I help you? A cheerful voice answered. I took a deep breath. Hi, this is Agnes Montgomery. The lie tasted bitter. My husband and I recently leased with you, but I've misplaced our unit number. Could you remind me? Of course, Mrs. Montgomery. You're in Unit 7018. Would you like me to transfer you to maintenance? No, thank you. That's all I needed. I ended the call, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Unit 718. The Montgomerys. Paxton had rented an apartment with this woman, using our last name. While I fought for breath in a hospital bed, he was creating a new life, a shadow existence where another woman answered to my name. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it left me numb. This wasn't a momentary lapse, a single mistake made in weakness. This was deliberate, planned. Paxton had constructed an entire parallel reality while systematically dismantling ours. I must have made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, because the nurse returned, her expression concerned as she checked the monitors. Your heart rate is elevated, she said. Are you in pain? A laugh escaped me, harsh and unfamiliar. Not the kind you can treat. She looked at me questioningly, but I just shook my head. How could I explain that my husband, the man who had promised to build a life with me, was instead constructing one with someone else? That while illness had brought me to this hospital bed, betrayal was what would keep me awake through the long night ahead. After the nurse left, I lay still, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What should I do? Confront Paxton? Demand answers? Pretend I didn't know until I was strong enough to face the consequences? In the end, I did something else entirely. I called my lawyer. Robert had handled my grandmother's estate and the property transfer when we bought the house. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with recognition. Dorothy, it's been ages. How are you? Not well, Robert. My voice cracked. I'm in the hospital with pneumonia, and I've just discovered my husband is having an affair. He's rented an apartment with another woman. Silence, then a sympathetic sigh. I'm so sorry, Dorothy. That's a lot to process. There's more, I continued. The house, our house. It's only in my name. We never added Paxton to the deed. That's right, Robert confirmed. I remember recommending you do so once the renovation loans were paid, but we never completed that paperwork. So legally, it's my house. Mine alone. Correct. Though in a divorce, depending on the jurisdiction and how long you've been married, he might still have claims to a portion of its value as marital property. I absorbed this information, a plan beginning to form. What if I wanted him removed? From the property? Immediately? Robert's tone turned cautious. Dorothy, making major legal decisions while you're ill might not be... He's moved another woman into an apartment using our last name, I interrupted. I think he's planning to leave me. I need to protect myself. A pause, then. If the property is solely in your name, and you have reason to believe he's abandoned the marriage, we could file for an emergency eviction. But it's an aggressive move that would effectively end any chance of reconciliation. I understand. The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy with finality. Are you certain this is what you want? For a moment, I hesitated. Despite everything, part of me still loved the man Paxton had been, or the man I thought he was. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who could abandon his sick wife, who could build a new life while I fought to breathe. Yes, I said finally. It's what I want. But not yet. I need to see it for myself first. See what? The apartment. Them. I need to know it's real before I tear everything apart. Robert sighed. Dorothy, in your condition, I'm being discharged in 2 days if my oxygen levels stay stable. The doctor already told me. At least wait until you're stronger. Confrontations like this are physically and emotionally draining. I'll be careful, I promised, though I had no idea what careful looked like in a situation this broken. But I need to do this. I need to see the truth with my own eyes. After ending the call, I lay back, exhaustion washing over me. The revelation had drained what little energy I had, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I kept seeing Paxton and this nameless, faceless Agnes in their sleek Riverview apartment, building the life that should have been ours. As darkness fell outside, my hospital window, I made 2 promises to myself. I would get well enough to leave this hospital, and when I did, I would reclaim what was mine, my dignity, my home, my future. Paxton had made his choice. Now I would make mine. The next morning, I woke with a resolve that surprised even me. Despite the weakness in my limbs and the persistent ache in my chest, I felt mentally sharper than I had in months. Perhaps it was the clarity that comes with having illusions stripped away, or simply the focus that emerges when a path forward finally appears. I asked my doctor for an honest assessment of my condition. Dr. Audrey Williams had been managing my case since admission, her calm competence a steady anchor in the storm of my illness. The infection is responding to antibiotics, she said, reviewing my chart. Your oxygen levels are improving, though they're not yet where I'd like them to be. Why do you ask? I need to know when I can go home. She studied me over her glasses. Medically speaking, if your improvement continues, we could discharge you in 2 to 3 days. But you'll need rest, Dorothy. Pneumonia isn't something you bounce back from overnight. I understand, I said, though rest was the furthest thing from my mind. But there are situations at home I need to address. Dr. Williams sat on the edge of my bed, her expression softening. Is everything all right? Do you have someone to help you during recovery? The kindness in her voice nearly broke my composure. No, I admitted. My husband. He's not available. Something in my tone must have communicated more than my words, because she nodded slowly. I see. Well, in that case, we should discuss home health options. You'll need some assistance, at least initially. We talked through the practicalities. Visiting. Nurses, oxygen tanks, prescription deliveries, all the while my mind spinning with plans that had nothing to do with my physical recovery. When she left, I picked up my phone again and called Kayla. "Dorothy," she answered immediately. "How are you feeling? I've been so worried." "I need your help," I said, bypassing the pleasantries. "It's about Paxton." There was a pause. "You know, don't you?" "About Agnes?" "Yes." The name still felt foreign on my tongue. "What I don't know is who she is or how long it's been going on." Kayla sighed. "I wanted to tell you more when I saw them together, but you were already sick, and I wasn't completely sure." "I'm sure now," I interrupted. "He's rented an apartment with her. They're using our last name." "Oh, Dorothy." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." "I don't need sorry. I need information." My tone was harder than I intended, but Kayla didn't flinch. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Who is she? How did they meet? What do people know?" Kayla hesitated. "Are you sure you want this right now? You're still recovering." "Please, Kayla." I softened my voice. "I need to understand what I'm facing." She relented, sharing what she knew. Agnes was indeed the new intern at Paxton's firm, a recent architecture graduate, talented and ambitious, 28 to my 42. They'd been seen together with increasing frequency over the past few months, first at professional events, then at restaurants and bars where no business was being conducted. "The rumor is they met when she interviewed for the internship," Kayla said reluctantly. "Apparently, there was an immediate connection. An immediate connection. While I was at home, supporting his career, managing our household, believing in our future, Paxton had formed an immediate connection with someone else." "How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "How long have they been seeing each other?" "From what I've heard, at least 6 months." 6 months? Half a year of lies, of coming home late, of distant kisses and distracted conversations, of me making excuses for him, defending him to friends who noticed his absence, believing the story he'd constructed. "Dorothy? Are you still there?" "Yes." I swallowed hard. "I need one more favor. Can you come to the hospital tomorrow? I'm being discharged the day after, and I need to make plans." "Of course." No hesitation this time. "Anything you need." After hanging up, I lay back, staring at the ceiling. 6 months. The timeline aligned perfectly with the changes in Paxton, with the gradual erosion of our marriage. While I'd been telling myself it was temporary, a phase related to work stress, he'd been systematically detaching from our life together. Yet some stubborn part of me still resisted the finality of it all. Perhaps there was an explanation I hadn't considered. Perhaps, if confronted directly, Paxton would realize what he was throwing away. We had 8 years together, a home, a history. Could he really discard all of that for a 6-month affair? With an intern? Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up my phone again and called him. This time he answered. "Dorothy?" He sounded surprised, as if he'd forgotten I existed. "Is everything okay?" "No, Paxton, everything is not okay." My voice was calm, controlled. "I know about Agnes." Silence stretched between us. So long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, quietly, "What exactly do you know?" "I know you're having an affair with her. I know you've rented an apartment at the Riverview, Unit 718, under the name Montgomery. I know it's been going on for months while I thought you were working late." Another silence, then a heavy sigh. "I was going to tell you." "When?" I demanded, anger finally breaking through my composure. "When, Paxton? After I recovered from pneumonia? Or were you hoping I wouldn't recover at all?" "That's not fair." His voice hardened. "I never wished you harm." "No. You just abandoned me while I was fighting to breathe. You just started a new life while I was still living our old one." Dorothy. I'm being discharged the day after tomorrow. I cut him off. I'll be coming home. Our home. The one that, legally, belongs to me. We need to talk about this rationally, he said, his tone shifting to the one he used for difficult clients. There are things you don't understand. I understand enough. But you're right, we do need to talk. In person. At home. I can't tomorrow. I have meetings. The day after tomorrow then, I insisted. When I'm discharged, be there, Paxton, or I'll have my lawyer there instead. I ended the call before he could respond, my heart racing so fast it triggered one of the monitors. A nurse came in adjusting something on the IV, murmuring something about staying calm. But calm was the last thing I felt. In its place was a cold, focused fury that pushed away the weakness, the hurt, even the betrayal. Paxton thought he could just walk away, start over with someone new, erase our life together like it was a preliminary sketch that hadn't worked out. But I wouldn't make it that easy. If our marriage was truly over, and I was beginning to accept that it was, then I would ensure the ending was written on my terms, not his. The following day, Kayla arrived with a small suitcase of my clothes and a fierce loyalty that brought tears to my eyes. We spent hours planning, strategizing. She'd drive me home from the hospital. She'd stay with me during the confrontation with Paxton. She'd help me through whatever came next. You don't have to face this alone, she assured, me, squeezing my hand. I'm here. We'll get through it together. For the first time since discovering Paxton's betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope. Not for our marriage. That hope had died with each new revelation. But for myself. For the possibility that there might be life after this devastation, that I might emerge from this stronger than before. That night I made one final call, to Robert, confirming our legal strategy. If Paxton refused to leave voluntarily, we would proceed with the eviction. If he contested the property ownership, we were prepared for that battle too. I was done being the understanding wife, the supportive partner who set aside her own needs. It was time to protect myself, to fight for what was rightfully mine. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was of the house. Our house. My house. The one physical manifestation of our shared dreams that remained solely in my name. Paxton had taken so much from me. My trust, my security, my belief in our future. But he wouldn't take my home. On that, I was resolved. The day of my discharge arrived with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Dr. Williams reviewed my care instructions one last time, emphasizing the need for rest and continued medication. Your body is still healing, she reminded me, her kind eyes serious. Pneumonia depletes your strength in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Promise me you'll take it easy. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I explain that rest was a luxury I couldn't afford? That the confrontation ahead would demand every ounce of strength I possessed? Kayla arrived mid-morning, her face a welcome sight after days of impersonal hospital interactions. She'd brought fresh clothes, loose, comfortable items that wouldn't strain my still tender lungs. Ready? She asked after the nurse had removed my IV and completed the discharge paperwork. As I'll ever be, I replied, allowing her to help me into a wheelchair. Hospital policy for all discharged patients, regardless of their ability to walk. The journey from hospital bed to Kayla's waiting car exhausted me more than I wanted to admit. By the time we pulled away from the curb, I was breathing heavily. The simple act of sitting upright demanding more energy than I had to give. We could postpone this, Kayla suggested, glancing at me with concern. Go to my place instead. Deal. With Paxton when you're stronger? I shook my head. No. It has to be today. I need to see his face when he realizes I know everything. Kayla didn't argue, but I could feel her worry as we drove in silence toward the home that no longer felt like mine. As we turned onto Oakwood Drive, my stomach tightened. There, parked in our driveway, was Paxton's car, and beside it a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. "He's not alone," I said, my voice thin. "He brought her to our house." Kayla's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Do you want me to call Robert? Have him meet us here?" I considered it briefly, then shook my head. "No, I need to do this myself." "You're not by yourself," she reminded me firmly. "I'm right here." We parked behind the unfamiliar car, and Kayla came around to help me out. Standing on the driveway, looking up at the Victorian home I'd loved for so long, I felt a surge of determination cut through my physical weakness. This house was mine, the one thing Paxton couldn't take from me. I took a steadying breath and started up the walkway, Kayla's supportive arm around my waist. Each step was an effort, but I refused to show it. I would not enter my own home looking defeated. The door was unlocked. We stepped inside to find the entryway transformed, just as I'd described from my first shock upon returning. The console table, the photos, the familiar scent, all replaced with someone else's vision of home. From the living room, we heard voices, Paxton's deep tone and a lighter, feminine one, engaged in casual conversation. They hadn't heard us enter. "Ready?" Kayla whispered. I nodded, and we moved forward together. They were sitting on my sofa, or rather, on a sofa that had replaced mine. Paxton lounged comfortably, one arm stretched along the back cushions. Beside him sat a dark-haired woman in her late 20s, stylishly dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my hospital bill. Agnes, I presumed, finally given form after haunting my thoughts for days. They both looked up at our entrance, conversation halting mid-sentence. Paxton's expression shifted rapidly from surprise to dismay to a forced neutrality. Agnes simply looked confused, her perfect eyebrows drawing together as she glanced between Paxton and me. "Dorothy," Paxton said, standing quickly. "We weren't expecting you until this evening." "Clearly," I replied, my gaze taking in the wine glasses on the coffee table, the casual intimacy of their positioning. "You seem quite comfortable in my house, Agnes." The young woman blinked, startled at being addressed directly. "Dorothy, this isn't how I wanted to do this," Paxton interrupted, moving toward me with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "You're still recovering. We should discuss this when you're stronger. How considerate of you to worry about my health now," I said, the bitterness in my tone unmistakable. "Where was that concern while I was in the hospital for 3 weeks?" Agnes stood, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Perhaps I should go." "No, stay," I insisted, my voice stronger than I felt. "Since you've already made yourself at home in my house, you might as well be part of this conversation." Paxton's expression hardened. "Dorothy, you're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" I repeated, incredulous. "I come home from fighting pneumonia to find you've moved your girlfriend into our house, replaced my belongings, and I'm being unreasonable?" "It's not like that," he began, but I cut him off. "Then what is it like, Paxton? Explain it to me. Explain how this—" I gestured between him and Agnes. "Isn't exactly what it looks like." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. "I was going to tell you, after you recovered. I didn't want to stress you while you were ill?" "How thoughtful," Kayla muttered beside me, her arm still steady around my waist. Agnes stepped forward, her expression earnest. "Dorothy, we never meant to hurt you. These things, they just happen sometimes." The audacity of her statement struck me like a physical blow. "Things don't just happen, Agnes. People make choices. Paxton chose to betray our marriage. You chose to get involved with a married man. And now you've both chosen to invade my home while I was too sick to defend it." "Your home?" Agnes glanced at Paxton, confusion evident. I thought, "What did you think?" I asked, turning my full attention to her. That this was his house? That I was the inconvenient wife who would quietly disappear? Paxton moved between us. "Dorothy, that's enough. Agnes isn't to blame here. If you want to be angry with me." "Oh, I am," I assured him, my voice icy. "But she's not innocent. In this either." Agnes touched Paxton's arm, a gesture of intimacy that made my stomach turn. "Maybe I should wait in the car." "No," Paxton said firmly. "You don't have to leave. Dorothy and I need to have a rational conversation about how to move forward. This house, it's a joint asset. We'll need to sell it and divide the proceeds." A cold smile formed on my lips. "That's where you're wrong, Paxton. This house isn't a joint asset. It's mine. Only my name is on the deed." He stared at me, disbelief washing over his features. "That can't be right. We bought it together." "We chose it together," I corrected. "I paid for it. My inheritance, remember? We discussed adding you to the deed after the renovation loans were paid, but we never did." "That was just a formality," he insisted, but I could see the uncertainty creeping into his expression. The law doesn't recognize formalities, only legal documents. And legally, this house belongs to me alone. Agnes's hand dropped from Paxton's arm. "You told me the house was yours," she said quietly, "that we would live here until we found something that was ours together." The revelation that Paxton had lied to Agnes as well didn't surprise me, but it did confirm something I'd begun to suspect. His betrayal went deeper than just our marriage. It was a fundamental character flaw, a willingness to reshape reality to suit his desires. "I'm afraid he misled you," I told her, not unkindly. The anger I felt toward this woman was fading, replaced by a weary recognition that she, too, had been manipulated by Paxton's selective truths. Paxton's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. I've contributed to this house for years. The mortgage payments, the renovations—" "Rent," I interrupted. "What you've paid amounts to rent, legally speaking. The house remains solely in my name." He turned to Kayla, desperation edging into his voice. "You can't believe she's being rational about this. She's still sick, not thinking clearly." Kayla's expression remained impassive. "I believe she's thinking more clearly than she has in months. And I believe it's time for you both to leave." "Leave?" Paxton laughed, though there was no humor in it. "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere." I straightened, ignoring the pain in my chest, the weakness in my limbs. "Yes, you are. Today, now, take what belongs to you personally and go. And if I refuse," his voice was low, dangerous, "then I call the police and have you removed for trespassing," I replied evenly. "I've already spoken with my lawyer. He's prepared to file an emergency eviction if necessary, given the circumstances." The color drained from Paxton's face as the reality of his situation finally sank in. He had no legal claim to the house, no right to be there if I ordered him to leave. Everything he had assumed about our shared assets, about his power in this situation, was built on a foundation that didn't exist. Agnes looked between us, the full implications dawning on her as well. "Paxton, is this true? The house isn't yours?" He didn't answer, his eyes locked with mine in a silent battle of wills. In that moment, I saw something shift in his gaze, the realization that he had miscalculated, that his carefully constructed new life was crumbling before it had truly begun. The balance of power had shifted. In my weakened state, still recovering from pneumonia, I had somehow become the strongest person in the room. The property deed, that overlooked document we had never updated, had become my unexpected ally, my leverage in a situation where I'd thought I had none. "You have 1 hour," I said quietly. "Then I'm calling the police." The hour I'd given Paxton stretched into a tense standoff. Initially, He refused to believe I would actually call the police, insisting I was bluffing. Agnes stood awkwardly to the side, her confident demeanor crumbling as she witnessed the unraveling of whatever promises Paxton had made her. "This is absurd," Paxton said, pacing the living room. "We've been married 8 years. You can't just throw me out of my own home." "Your name isn't on the deed," I reminded him calmly, though my heart was racing. "Legally, it's not your home." "We're still married," he countered. "That makes this marital property." "Which we can discuss during divorce proceedings," I replied. "But for now, I want you out." The word divorce hung in the air between us. Until that moment, neither of us had spoken it aloud, though it had been the unspoken destination we were hurtling toward. Agnes tugged at Paxton's sleeve. "Maybe we should go," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "We can stay at the apartment until this is sorted out." Paxton shook her off. "No, I'm not leaving my house because she's having some sort of breakdown." His dismissive tone ignited something in me. "This isn't a breakdown, Paxton. This is clarity. For the first time in months, I'm seeing our situation exactly as it is." Turned to Kayla, who had remained steadfastly by my side. "Call the police." She nodded and pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, Paxton's demeanor changed. "Wait," he said, his voice softer. "Dorothy, please, let's not involve the authorities. We can work this out reasonably." "I tried reason," I said. "You chose Agnes instead." His expression hardened again. "Fine, I'll go, but this isn't over. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "I look forward to it," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Paxton stormed upstairs, presumably, to collect some belongings. Agnes hesitated, then approached me cautiously. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know about the house, about how sick you were. He told me you two were already separated." I studied her face, searching for insincerity, but finding only confusion and embarrassment. She was young, probably naive, definitely misled by Paxton's selective truths. "How long?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Agnes glanced toward the stairs, ensuring Paxton wasn't within earshot. 6 months, officially. But he's been pursuing me for longer. He said your marriage was over in all but paperwork, that you had both accepted it. The timeline aligned with what Kayla had told me, with the changes I'd noticed in Paxton. 6 months of betrayal while I made excuses for his absences, his distraction, his growing coldness. "Did you know I was in the hospital?" She nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. "He said it was just a minor infection, that you were being kept for observation and would be fine. A minor infection." While doctors had been concerned about my survival, Paxton had been downplaying my condition to justify his abandonment. Before I could respond, Paxton returned downstairs with a suitcase and his laptop bag. "Let's go," he said to Agnes, not even looking at me. "Paxton," I called as they headed for the door. "Leave your key." He turned, eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious." "I am. And I'll be changing the locks today." For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might escalate the confrontation further. But something in my expression, or perhaps the realization that I held the legal advantage, made him reconsider. He pulled his keyring from his pocket, removed the house key, and tossed it onto the console table with deliberate force. "This isn't over," he repeated, his voice low and threatening. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It was over the moment you moved her into our home." They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a finality that should have brought relief. Instead, as their cars pulled away from the curb, I felt my strength evaporate. My legs buckled, and only Kayla's quick reflexes kept me from collapsing completely. "I've got you," she murmured, helping me to the nearest chair, one I didn't recognize, that Agnes had presumably selected. "You did it, Dorothy. They're gone." But the victory felt hollow as I looked around at my transformed home. The furniture, rearranged or replaced. The walls repainted in colors I'd never choose. My photographs removed. My books nowhere to be seen. They were gone, yes, but they had left their mark everywhere. "He really thought he could just erase me," I said, my voice cracking. "Replace everything that was mine, everything that was us, and I'd never know because I was too sick to come home." Kayla squeezed my hand. "But you did come home, and now we're going to reclaim it, piece by piece." As my breathing steadied, I realized she was right. Paxton might have altered the physical space, but the house itself, the structure, the foundation, the legal ownership, remained mine. I had won the first battle, but I knew Paxton well enough to recognize that the war was just beginning. The following morning, I woke in my own bed, though my own felt like a stretch. The mattress was new, firmer than I preferred. The bedding, unfamiliar, in shades of burgundy and gold that I would never have chosen. Even the bedroom walls had been repainted, from the soft blue I'd selected to a stark, modern gray. Lying there, still weak from pneumonia and the previous day's confrontation, I had what I can only describe as a moment of perfect clarity. This wasn't just about Paxton's betrayal or Agnes's intrusion. It was about something deeper, something that had been building long before I'd fallen ill. Paxton hadn't just replaced me with Agnes. He'd been trying to replace himself. The ambitious but kind man I'd married had gradually transformed into someone I barely recognized, someone who valued status over sincerity, appearance over substance. The redecorated house, with its trendy colors and impersonal furnishings, wasn't Agnes's taste. It was the manifestation of Paxton's reinvention of himself. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when we'd furnished our first apartment, with secondhand finds and DIY projects. Paxton had been proud of his handiwork then, of our ability to create a home from practically nothing. When had that changed? When had our authenticity become something to be ashamed of, something to be upgraded and repackaged? The success he'd craved had finally arrived, but it had hollowed him out. And rather than recognizing the emptiness, he'd filled it with external validation. A younger woman, expensive furniture, the appearance of the perfect life. In doing so, he'd discarded not just me, but the parts of himself that I had truly loved. Painful as this realization was, it brought an unexpected relief. The betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a manifestation of Paxton's insecurities. I wasn't the one who had failed our marriage. He had failed himself. With this clarity came a profound understanding. I didn't want him back. Not the man he had become. Not the marriage we had devolved into. Even if he came begging for forgiveness, I would not return to a relationship built on such a fragile foundation. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Slowly, I made my way downstairs, still unsteady but determined to manage on my own. Kayla had stayed late the previous evening, helping me change the locks and inventorying what was missing: my grandmother's silver, my photography equipment, personal mementos that Paxton had carelessly discarded or hidden away. Opening the door, I found a young man in a delivery uniform holding a large bouquet of flowers. "Delivery for Dorothy Montgomery," he said cheerfully. I accepted the arrangement, with murmured thanks, setting it on the unfamiliar console table in the entryway. The card was small, but the handwriting unmistakable. Paxton's precise architect's script. "Dorothy, I'm sorry things escalated yesterday. Let's talk when you're feeling better. We can work this out reasonably. P." I stared at the card, feeling nothing but a detached curiosity. No flutter of hope, no surge of anger, just a clinical observation of his tactics. This was classic Paxton, a gesture designed to appear generous while actually serving his interests. The flowers weren't an apology. They were a negotiation strategy. In the past, I might have been swayed by such gestures, might have seen them as proof that the man I loved was still in there somewhere. But my eyes were clear now. I saw the manipulation for what it was, an attempt to regain control of the narrative, to cast himself as the reasonable party while painting me as the emotional, irrational one. I dropped the card into the trash and moved the flowers to the back porch. Their cloying sweetness reminded me too much of the perfume that had permeated my house when I'd first returned. Agnes's scent, marking her territory. Sitting in the kitchen, with a cup of tea, I surveyed the space that had once been my sanctuary. The familiar butcher block countertops remained, but everything else had been altered. Modern appliances I didn't know how to use, sleek cabinetry that sacrificed storage for style, a cold marble backsplash replacing the handmade tiles we'd installed together. It would take time and money to restore the house to a place that felt like mine again. But I realized I didn't want to simply revert to what had been. That house had belonged to Dorothy and Paxton, to a marriage that no longer existed. This house, my house, needed to reflect the woman I was becoming, not the wife I had been. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert, my lawyer. Paxton's attorney called. He's contesting the eviction, claiming marital property rights. Don't worry, we're on solid legal ground. Meeting tomorrow at 10? I texted back my confirmation, a strange calm settling over me. Let Paxton fight. Let him waste his money on legal fees and posturing. The deed was in my name, and no amount of flowers or legal maneuvering would change that fundamental fact. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt fully in control of my own story. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Recovery from pneumonia, divorce proceedings, rebuilding my life. But it was my path, not one defined by Paxton's choices or Agnes's intrusion. This clarity, this certainty of purpose, was worth more than the years of false security I'd lived in before. I had lost a husband, but I had found myself in the process, and that, I realized, was a trait I could live with. The meeting with Robert was scheduled for 10 a.m. at his downtown office. Despite still feeling weak, I insisted on going rather than having him come to the house. I needed to get out, to breathe. Air that wasn't permeated with memories of Paxton and traces of Agnes's perfume. Kayla drove me, fussing over my slow movements and labored breathing. "You really should be resting," she said as she helped me into her car. "I'll rest when my house is legally secured," I replied, settling into the passenger seat with a wince. Robert's office was located in a century-old building with a recently renovated interior. Historic facade with modern amenities, the kind of architectural blend Paxton would have appreciated. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Dorothy," Robert greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk as his assistant showed us in. "You should have let me come to you. You're still recovering." "I needed the change of scenery," I said, easing into the chair opposite his desk. "And I wanted to discuss this somewhere Paxton couldn't interrupt." Robert nodded, understanding immediately. "Well, I'm glad you're here. We have some developments to discuss." He spread several documents across his desk, explaining that Paxton's attorney had indeed filed a motion contesting the eviction, claiming that regardless of whose name was on the deed, the house constituted marital property given our 8 years of marriage. "It's a standard argument," Robert explained, "but it doesn't change the immediate situation. The house is solely in your name, which gives you the right to determine who lives there, at least until a court orders otherwise." "And will a court order otherwise?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Robert's expression was measured. "It's possible that in the divorce settlement, Paxton could be awarded a portion of the home's value. But given the circumstances, your inheritance being the source of the down payment, his apparent abandonment during your illness, the evidence of his affair, I believe we have a strong case for you retaining full ownership," The word divorce still felt strange, a foreign concept I was only beginning to integrate into my reality. But as Robert outlined our strategy, I felt a growing certainty that this was the right path. Not just legally, but emotionally. Paxton and I had been over long before I discovered Agnes. "There's something else," Robert said, his tone shifting slightly. "Paxton's attorney has suggested mediation rather than litigation. They're proposing a settlement conference next week." "So soon?" Kayla interjected. "Dorothy's barely out of the hospital." Robert nodded sympathetically. I expressed the same concern. But there's a tactical advantage to their rush. They're hoping to capitalize on Dorothy's vulnerability, her physical weakness. "What do you recommend?" I asked, ignoring the flare of anger at Paxton's transparent strategy. Normally, I'd advise taking your time, regaining your strength before engaging in what could be an emotionally draining process. But in this case, he hesitated. "In this case?" I prompted. "In this case, I believe there's an advantage to moving quickly. Paxton's position is weaker than he realizes. His actions, moving another woman into your home while you were hospitalized, removing your personal belongings, attempting to claim residence in a property not legally his, none of this will play well if we end up in court. I considered this, weighing my physical limitations against the strategic advantage of acting now. What would the mediation involve? A neutral third party would facilitate discussion of all marital assets, the house, savings, investments, personal property. The goal would be to reach a mutually acceptable division without court intervention. And if we can't agree, then we proceed to litigation, where a judge would make the final determination. I sat back, processing this information. The practical. Part of me recognized the value in avoiding a drawn-out legal battle. The emotional part still reeled at the thought of sitting across from Paxton, negotiating the dismantling of our life together. But as I considered the alternatives, months of uncertainty, of Paxton potentially finding new ways to assert claims, on the house of living in limbo, something shifted inside me. A decision crystallized, not just about the legal strategy, but about the direction of my life. "Schedule the mediation," I said firmly. "But I want to be clear about my position from the outset. The house stays with me, completely. I'm willing to be reasonable about other assets, but the house is non-negotiable." Robert nodded, making notes. "That's a strong starting position. We'll need to inventory all marital assets, document the source of funds for the house purchase, and gather evidence of Paxton's misconduct." "I can help with that," Kayla offered. "I've got photos of them together dating back months, texts from friends who saw them, even screenshots of Agnes's social media where she's been not so subtly hinting at her new relationship." The support from Kayla touched me deeply. While Paxton had been building a new life with Agnes, I had friends who'd been paying attention, gathering evidence, looking out for me even when I hadn't realized I needed protection. As we left Robert's office an hour later, plans in place for the mediation, I felt lighter despite my physical exhaustion. The path ahead was clear now. I would fight for my house, disentangle my life from Paxton's, and begin the process of rebuilding on my own terms. "Are you sure about this?" Kayla asked as we drove home. "It's going to be intense, facing him so soon." I watched the city pass by outside the window, its familiar skyline somehow different now, full of possibilities rather than memories. "Sure," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I spent too many months in limbo, sensing something was wrong but afraid to confront it. I won't live like that anymore. It's time to move forward, whatever that looks like. Kayla reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well, whatever it looks like, you won't be facing it alone." And for the first time since coming home to find Agnes in my house, I genuinely smiled. The decision was made. The future, uncertain as it was, belonged to me now. The week before the mediation passed in a blur of activity, despite my still limited physical stamina. Each day brought small victories that strengthened my resolve. First came the locksmith, changing every external lock and installing a security system I could monitor from my phone. Peace of mind, the technician called it as he demonstrated the features. What he didn't say, but we both understood, was that it was protection against Paxton's potential return. Next, I hired a moving company to place everything Agnes had brought into the house, the modern furniture, abstract paintings, sleek appliances, into storage. Send the bill to Paxton Montgomery at the Riverview Apartments, Unit 718, I instructed the manager, a small but satisfying act of rebellion. As the movers worked, Kayla and I searched the house for my belongings. We found some in the attic, boxes, hastily packed with my clothes, books, and photographs, but many items were simply gone, either discarded or hidden away where we couldn't find them. "He really thought you weren't coming back," Kayla said quietly as we sorted through what remained. "He was erasing you completely." The realization stung, but it also strengthened my determination. I would not be erased, not from my own home, not from my own life. With the unfamiliar furniture gone, the house felt empty, but somehow more mine than it had since my return. I slept on an air mattress in the bedroom, the bare walls a blank canvas rather than a reminder of what had been lost. Robert called daily with updates on the legal front. Paxton's attorney had requested financial records, proof of the inheritance that had purchased the house, documentation of my contributions to our marriage. "Standard discovery," Robert assured me. "We're compiling our own requests. The fact that he redecorated while you were hospitalized will be particularly relevant." I spent hours gathering documents, bank statements, property records, medical bills from my hospital stay. Each piece of paper told part of our story, a clinical record of what our marriage had become. One afternoon, I was sorting through old photographs when the doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw a delivery person with a large envelope. I signed for it, recognizing immediately the letterhead of Paxton's attorney on the contents. Inside was a settlement offer, the first concrete indication of what Paxton wanted from our divorce. He would relinquish any claim to the house in exchange for 75% of our joint savings, full ownership of his architecture firm, which had been established during our marriage and was technically marital property, and several specific items of significant personal value. I scanned the list of these supposedly valuable items, my breath catching as I recognized what he was really after. My grandmother's silver collection, which was genuinely valuable, and the original architectural drawings of our house, which I had commissioned from a renowned artist as an anniversary gift years ago. The silver didn't surprise me. Paxton had always calculated its worth. But the drawings? Those had been a symbol of our shared dream, our vision for the home we'd created together. That he wanted them not for sentimental reasons but as assets to be claimed felt like a final confirmation of how completely our marriage had transformed from partnership to transaction. I forwarded the offer to Robert with a single word. No. His response came within minutes. "Agreed. We'll counter." The day before the mediation, Kayla insisted on taking me shopping. "You need armor," she declared, ushering me into a boutique I normally wouldn't have entered. The prices were higher than my freelance photographer's budget typically allowed, but I understood her intention. This wasn't about fashion, it was about reclaiming my identity. I emerged with a tailored navy suit that made me feel strong despite my still too thin frame and low heels that allowed me to move steadily despite my lingering weakness. Looking at my reflection in the dressing room mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because of the pneumonia's toll, but because of the determination in my eyes, the set of my jaw. "That's it," Kayla said approvingly. "That's the look that will make him regret ever thinking he could replace you." That evening, I practiced what I would say at the mediation, rehearsing calmly assertive responses to various scenarios. I anticipated Paxton's tactics, his charm when it served him, his righteous indignation when challenged, his practiced ability to make others see his perspective while dismissing theirs. But even as I prepared logical arguments and practiced maintaining emotional control, I knew that the most powerful statement would be my very presence, alive, recovering, and fighting for what was mine when he had expected me to fade away. The night before the mediation, I received a text from an unknown number. "I hope you're feeling better. I never wanted things to end this way. Agnes." I stared at the message, surprised by this unexpected communication. Was it genuine concern? A tactical move suggested by Paxton? An attempt to gauge my position before tomorrow's meeting? In the end, I decided it didn't matter. Agnes wasn't my enemy. She was a symptom of the disease that had infected my marriage long before she appeared. Paxton's choices were his own, as were mine. I deleted the message without responding. As I settled onto my air mattress that night, surrounded by the bare walls of what was once again becoming my home, I felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow would be difficult, facing Paxton across a conference table, dissecting our marriage into assets and liabilities, negotiating the terms of its dissolution. But for the first time in months, perhaps years, I was walking into a situation with Paxton where I held the power. Not just legally, because my name was on the deed, but emotionally. I had nothing left to lose that he hadn't already taken. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, was its own kind of freedom. The mediation center occupied the top floor of a downtown building, its walls lined with abstract art meant to soothe heightened emotions. I arrived with Robert precisely 15 minutes early, enough time to settle ourselves in the waiting area, but not so early that we'd appear anxious. "Remember," Robert said quietly, "mediation is non-binding. You don't have to agree to anything today. If Paxton or his attorney become aggressive or unreasonable, we can walk away." I nodded, smoothing the jacket of my new suit. The weight I'd lost during my illness made me look more fragile than I felt, but I'd applied makeup carefully that morning, covering the pallor that lingered from pneumonia. I needed to appear strong, capable, fully in control of my faculties. At precisely 9 a.m., the receptionist led us to a conference room where the mediator, a silver-haired woman named Judith, greeted us warmly. She explained the process as we waited for Paxton and his attorney to arrive. "My role is to facilitate discussion, not to make judgments or rulings," she said. "I'm here to help you both find common ground if possible." When the door opened again, I steeled myself. Paxton entered, his attorney, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, close behind. Paxton's eyes found mine immediately, and I saw a flicker of surprise cross his face. Perhaps he'd expected me to still look ill, to appear diminished. Instead, I met his gaze steadily, my back straight, despite the effort it cost me. "Ms. Montgomery, Mr. Montgomery," Judith nodded to each of us. "Let's begin." The first hour was procedural, establishing ground rules, reviewing the assets in question, confirming that both parties understood the process. Paxton's attorney, who introduced himself as John Teller, presented their position first. Paxton had been an equal contributor to the marriage despite the house being in my name alone, and deserved an equitable distribution of all assets. Furthermore, John added, "My client has expressed willingness to allow Ms. Montgomery to retain the house, provided she buys out his interest at fair market value." I noticed he avoided mentioning Agnes or the circumstances of our separation. Robert had warned me they would try to keep the narrative clinical, focused on finances rather than fidelity. When it was our turn, Robert calmly laid out our position. The house was purchased with Ms. Montgomery's inheritance and is solely in her name. While we acknowledge Mr. Montgomery contributed to household expenses, these contributions would legally be considered rent in the absence of his name on the deed. He then shifted to the circumstances, my hospitalization, Paxton's absence during my illness, the discovery of Agnes living in our home. My client returned from fighting a life-threatening case of pneumonia to find her husband had not only moved his paramour into her home, but had replaced her belongings, redecorated, and effectively attempted to erase her existence from the property she legally owns. Paxton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Gian placed a warning hand on his arm, preventing whatever objection he'd been about to voice. "These personal matters," Gian said smoothly, "while unfortunate, don't change the legal reality of assets acquired during marriage. On the contrary," Robert countered, "abandonment during illness and infidelity are absolutely relevant to equitable distribution in this jurisdiction." The mediator interjected, steering us back to specifics. "Let's address the house first. Ms. Montgomery, are you willing to consider any financial settlement regarding the property?" I looked directly at Paxton as I answered. "No, the house stays with me outright. It was purchased with my inheritance, maintained with my income as much as his, and is legally mine. I'm willing to be reasonable about other assets, but not this." Paxton finally spoke, his voice carrying that familiar tone of reasonable condescension. "Dorothy, be realistic. We built that house together. My designs, my vision." "Your name isn't on the deed," I interrupted, surprising myself with my steadiness. "And while you were designing our supposed future, you were secretly building a different one with Agnes." His face flushed. "That's not, isn't it?" I pulled a folder from my bag, sliding it across the table. "Receipts from the Riverview Apartments, dated 3 months ago. Furniture deliveries, utility connections. All while I was managing our household, supporting your career, believing in our marriage." The mediator examined the documents, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Montgomery, would you like to respond to this?" Paxton glanced at his attorney, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "My relationship with Agnes developed after Dorothy and I had grown apart. The timing of the apartment was unfortunate, but not malicious. And moving her into our house while I was hospitalized? Was that also unfortunate, but not malicious?" My voice remained calm, though my heart raced. "I didn't think you were coming home," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between us, their implications striking me like a physical blow. He hadn't just hoped I wouldn't return, he had expected it. Whether he had truly believed the pneumonia, would claim me, or simply that I would be institutionalized for extended care, the message was clear. In Paxton's mind, I had already been replaced. The mediator cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." As Paxton and his attorney stepped out, Robert leaned close. That was illuminating. His statement about not expecting you to return could be interpreted as abandonment, which strengthens our position considerably. I nodded, still processing Paxton's words. The hurt was there, of course. How could it not be? But alongside it was a growing sense of resolve. With each revelation, each confirmation of Paxton's betrayal, my determination to reclaim my life solidified. When they returned, something had shifted in Paxton's demeanor. The confident facade had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man I'd once known, the one capable of shame, of recognizing when he'd crossed a line. "I'd like to revise our offer," Gian announced, glancing at Paxton. "My client is willing to relinquish all claims to the house without compensation, in exchange for full ownership of his firm and an equitable division of remaining liquid assets." It was a significant concession, one that suggested they recognized their position had weakened. Robert and I exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the momentum shifting in our favor. "Their new offer is significant progress," Robert whispered to me as the mediator stepped out briefly. "But we should push for more concessions on the personal property he's claiming." I nodded, reviewing the list of items Paxton still wanted. My grandmother's silver, the architectural drawings, and several pieces of art we'd collected together. Each held monetary value, But the silver was also irreplaceable family history. When the mediator returned, I leaned forward. "I'd like to address the personal property list," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "The silver collection belonged to my grandmother. It's a family heirloom, not a marital asset." Gian started to object, but Paxton touched his arm, silencing him. "She's right," he said quietly. "The silver should stay with Dorothy." The concession surprised me. It was the first time since our separation that Paxton had yielded something without obvious calculation. "Thank you," I said, meeting his eyes directly. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd married, someone capable of recognizing what truly mattered to others. But the moment passed quickly as Gian steered the conversation back to financial matters. "While my client is willing to concede on the silver, we maintain that the architectural drawings have significant value, both artistic and sentimental. They were commissioned during the marriage and depict the home my client helped design," Robert countered smoothly. "The drawings were an anniversary gift from my client to her husband. Gifts traditionally remain with the recipient unless returned voluntarily." "Then perhaps Mr. Montgomery would like to return them," the mediator suggested, looking at Paxton. A muscle twitched in Paxton's jaw, a tell I recognized from our marriage, a sign he was fighting to maintain composure. "Those drawings represent my vision, my career." "They represent our home," I corrected softly. "The one you abandoned." His eyes flashed. "I didn't abandon." "You moved another woman in while I was fighting for my life," I interrupted, my calm finally fracturing. "You replaced my belongings, redecorated rooms we had designed together, acted as if I no longer existed. If that's not abandonment, what is it?" The room fell silent. Even Gian seemed momentarily without a strategic response. Paxton looked away first. "It wasn't meant to happen like that." "How was it meant to happen, Paxton? What was the plan?" "Wait until I died or was transferred to long-term care, then move Agnes in permanently. Pretend our marriage had ended amicably? Rewrite our history to make your betrayal more palatable?" The words poured out, months of hurt and confusion crystallizing into precise questions. I hadn't raised my voice, but the intensity silenced everyone in the room. Paxton's face flushed. "That's not fair. I never..." "Never what? Never expected me to recover? Never thought I'd find out about Agnes? Never intended for me to see how quickly you replaced me, replaced us?" "I never stopped caring about you," he said, his voice barely audible. The statement was so absurd, so disconnected from his actions that I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that seemed to startle even me. "Caring doesn't look like what you did, Paxton. Caring would have been visiting me regularly in the hospital. Caring would have been preparing our home for my recovery. Caring would have been honoring our vows when I needed you most." He had no response, just stared down at his hands clasped tightly on the conference table. The mediator cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should redirect to the specific assets under discussion." "No," I said firmly. "This is relevant. Paxton's actions during my illness directly impact the equitable distribution of our assets. He didn't just have an affair. He actively worked to erase me from our home, from our life together, while I was physically unable to defend myself." Gian shifted uncomfortably. "My client acknowledges that his timing was unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" I repeated, incredulous. "Is that what we're calling it? Your client moved his girlfriend into a house that isn't legally his, disposed of his wife's personal property, and redecorated while she was hospitalized with life-threatening pneumonia. Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it." Robert placed a gentle hand on my arm, a reminder to maintain control. I took a deep breath, centering myself. "I'm not trying to punish Paxton," I continued more calmly. "I just want what's rightfully mine, the house my inheritance purchased, the family heirlooms that belong to my lineage, and the basic dignity of not being erased from my own life." Paxton finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "The drawings," he said after a long moment. "You can have them. And anything else of yours we haven't yet returned." Gian started to protest, but Paxton silenced him with a gesture. "Enough. Dorothy's right. I didn't handle this well." The understatement was so profound it almost made me laugh again. But the concession was real, and with it came a palpable shift in the room's energy. The adversarial tension eased, replaced by something more complicated. Not reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of resolution. The mediator, sensing the change, redirected us to the remaining financial matters. We spent the next hour negotiating the division of savings, retirement accounts, and other liquid assets. With the house and personal property issues settled, these discussions proceeded more smoothly. By early afternoon, we had a preliminary agreement. I would keep the house without any buyout payment to Paxton. He would retain full ownership of his architecture firm. Our savings and investments would be divided 60-40 in my favor, acknowledging my contributions to the household that had allowed his career to flourish, and all personal property would be returned to its original owner, with the drawings coming back to me. As the mediator summarized these terms, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to notice the difference. For the first time since discovering Paxton's betrayal, I could see a path forward that didn't require his cooperation or approval. "If both parties agree, we'll draft this into a formal settlement agreement for your attorneys to review," the mediator concluded. I nodded my assent. Across the table, Paxton did the same, his expression somber. As we prepared to leave, Paxton approached me while our attorneys were engaged in conversation with the mediator. "Dorothy," he said softly, "I am sorry. Not just for how things ended, but for not being the man you thought you married." I studied his face, searching for the calculation I'd grown accustomed to seeing. But there was only tired resignation, perhaps genuine regret. "I know," I replied simply, because I did know. Not just that he was sorry, but that his remorse came too late to change anything between us. Our marriage was over, not just legally, but emotionally. Whatever connection had once bound us had been severed by his choices and my response to them. As I walked away, I realized the confrontation I'd been dreading had become the catalyst for my freedom. By facing Paxton directly, by naming his betrayal, without flinching, I had reclaimed not just my legal rights, but my narrative. The truth of what had happened and who was responsible. It wasn't a complete victory. The loss of my marriage still ached beneath the triumph of securing my home. But it was enough for today. Enough to build upon tomorrow. In the weeks following the mediation, life took on a rhythm of quiet reconstruction. The formal settlement agreement was drafted, reviewed by our respective attorneys, and signed with surprisingly little additional conflict. Paxton, it seemed, had finally accepted the reality of our situation. True to his word, he arranged for the return of my belongings. Boxes arrived at the house, delivered by a moving company rather than by Paxton himself. My clothes, books, and personal items emerged from whatever storage he had relegated them to. The architectural drawings came last, carefully packaged and accompanied by a brief note. "These always belonged to you. I hung them in the dining room, not as a reminder of what had been lost, but as a testament to my ownership of this space, this home that was now truly mine alone." With the legal matters largely settled, I turned my attention to physical recovery and rebuilding my life. The pneumonia had left me weakened, my stamina diminished, but each day brought small improvements. I began working again. Small photography. Assignments at first, building back to my pre-illness workload as my strength returned. Kayla remained a constant presence, helping me replace the furniture Agnes had removed, accompanying me to doctor's appointments, ensuring I didn't push myself too hard. Other friends who had drifted away during the final months of my marriage returned, offering support and companionship as news of my situation spread. I never liked him, my friend Marcus admitted over coffee one afternoon. Too smooth, too calculated. But I kept it to myself because you seemed happy. I was happy, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Until I wasn't. The man I married wasn't the man Paxton became. That distinction between the Paxton I had loved and the one who had betrayed me became crucial to my healing. It allowed me to honor the good years of our marriage without minimizing the pain of its ending. The memories weren't invalidated by his betrayal. They were simply part of a completed chapter rather than an ongoing story. As my health improved, I began reimagining the spaces Agnes had altered. The stark gray bedroom walls were repainted a soothing sage green. The living room, stripped of her modern furniture, gradually filled with pieces that reflected my aesthetic, comfortable, warm, with an emphasis on natural materials and handcrafted elements. Each change made the house more mine, erasing the traces of Paxton and Agnes's brief occupation. I heard about them occasionally through mutual acquaintances. They were still together, living in the Riverview apartment. Paxton's firm had landed another major project. Agnes had been promoted from intern to junior designer. Their life continued, parallel to but separate from mine. One evening, as I was planting a small herb garden on the back porch, something I'd always wanted to do but Paxton had resisted, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Dorothy? It's Agnes. I froze, trowel in hand, dirt smudging my fingers. Agnes, I echoed, uncertain why she would be calling. I hope it's okay that I'm calling, she said, her voice hesitant. I wanted to apologize properly, for everything. I set down the trowel, wiping my hands on my jeans. I'm listening. What happened? How it happened? It wasn't right. I knew Paxton was married when we started seeing each other. He told me you had grown apart, that the relationship was essentially over, but, I prompted when she trailed off. But I should have asked more questions, should have insisted on clarity before getting involved. And I definitely should have refused to move into your house even temporarily. She paused. There's no excuse for that part. It was cruel and thoughtless, and I'm truly sorry. Her apology surprised me. Not just that she'd made it, but that it sounded genuine, lacking the defensive tone I might have expected. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. She hesitated. Because I need to make it right, for my own peace of mind, and because, well, Paxton and I are getting married. The news should have hurt, should have reopened wounds barely beginning to heal. Instead, I felt an unexpected lightness, the final confirmation that my marriage hadn't failed because of my inadequacy, but because Paxton had chosen a different path. Congratulations, I said, surprised to find I meant it. You don't hate me? Agnes sounded genuinely shocked. No, I replied after considering the question. I did for a while, but hate requires energy I'd rather direct elsewhere. You're very gracious, she said uncertainly. Not gracious, practical. What happened was painful, but it led me here, to a house that's fully mine, a life I'm rebuilding on my terms. I won't pretend you and Paxton didn't hurt me, but I'm not interested in carrying that pain forward. After we hung up, I returned to my gardening, pressing herb seedlings into the rich soil. There was something satisfying about the act of planting, committing to future growth, trusting that care and attention would yield results months from now. That night, I slept more soundly than I had since before my illness. The conversation with Agnes had provided an unexpected sense of closure. The legal settlement had secured my home. The apology had acknowledged the emotional debt. For the first time, I felt the weight of the past few months truly beginning to lift. The next morning, I woke to an email from my gallery liaison. A major magazine wanted to feature my photography series on urban renewal in their next issue. It was the kind of opportunity that could elevate my career, bring my work to a wider audience. The timing felt significant, a sign that my professional life was rising alongside my personal recovery. As I made coffee in my kitchen, now rearranged to my preferences, the sleek modern appliances Agnes had installed replaced with ones I actually knew how to use, I surveyed my domain. The house was transformed, no longer the home Paxton and I had shared, but not the sterile showcase he and Agnes had created either. It was mine, reflecting my tastes, my history, my future plans. For the first time since returning from the hospital to find my life upended, I felt a sense of genuine peace. The property deed had given me legal leverage, but the real victory was internal, the recognition that I could rebuild not just my home, but myself, stronger and more authentic than before. I was under no illusion that the journey was complete. There would be difficult days ahead, moments when the loss would reassert itself, practical challenges of maintaining a house on a single income. But the foundation was solid. The deed was in my name. The future, uncertain but full of possibility, belonged to me alone. 3 months after the settlement was signed, just as I'd begun to believe the worst was behind me, I received a certified letter from Jayan Teller, Paxton's attorney. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, anxiety flaring at this unexpected communication. Inside was a formal notice that Paxton was contesting our settlement agreement, claiming that his emotional distress during mediation had led him to accept unfavorable terms. He was demanding a new evaluation of the house, arguing that his architectural contributions had significantly increased its value and requesting 50% of that added value, despite not being on the deed. I called Robert immediately, the letter clutched in my shaking hand. "He can't do this," I said when Robert answered. "We have a signed agreement. It's done." "Let me see the filing," Robert replied calmly. "Don't panic yet. Post-settlement challenges rarely succeed without evidence of fraud or coercion." I scanned and emailed the documents, then paced my living room waiting for Robert's assessment. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, he called back. "This is desperation, not strategy," he said confidently. "My guess? Paxton's wedding plans with Agnes are straining his finances, and he's looking for additional assets. But can he actually reopen the settlement? He can try," Robert acknowledged, "but we have significant advantages. The mediation was properly conducted with legal representation on both sides. The property deed is solely in your name, and most importantly, we have documentation of his abandonment during your illness and his attempt to move Agnes into your home." Despite Robert's reassurance, sleep eluded me that night. I had believed we were finished, that Paxton had accepted the outcome and moved on. This sudden challenge threatened not just my legal position, but my emotional stability, the peace I'd worked so hard to reclaim. The next morning brought another surprise, a text from Agnes. "I just found out what Paxton is doing with the settlement. I had no idea. I'm so sorry." I stared at the message, uncertain how to respond or whether to trust her apparent distancing from Paxton's actions. Before I could decide, another text arrived. "If it helps, I have emails where he discussed moving me into our house while you were sick. He specifically mentioned knowing it wasn't legally his but assuming you'd never recover enough to contest it." My breath caught. Those emails would be powerful evidence of Paxton's true intentions, his calculated decision to take advantage of my illness. "Why would you share those?" I texted back. Her response came quickly. "Because what he did was wrong, to both of us. He told me you had agreed to divorce, that you knew about me, that the house was his. I don't want to marry someone capable of such manipulation." I forwarded the exchange to Robert, who called immediately. If she's willing to provide those emails, Paxton's challenge collapses completely. This could end before it truly begins. Agnes was indeed willing. Within days, she had forwarded a damning trail of correspondence showing Paxton's deliberate planning to move her into my house while I was hospitalized, his explicit acknowledgement that the property wasn't legally his, and his calculation that my illness would prevent me from asserting my rights. When confronted with this evidence, Paxton's attorney withdrew the challenge without further argument. I never heard directly from Paxton, but through mutual friends, I learned that his engagement to Agnes had ended abruptly, and he had moved out of the Riverview apartment. 1 year to the day after my hospital discharge, I hosted a housewarming party. Not because I had moved. I remained firmly rooted in the Victorian on Oakwood Drive, but because the house had finally become completely mine, transformed inside and out to reflect my vision rather than the ghosts of my past. Gone were the cold gray walls Agnes had selected, replaced with warm colors that shifted subtly with the changing light. The modern furniture had given way to a thoughtful collection of pieces that told my story. Some inherited, some purchased, new, others found at estate sales and lovingly restored by my own hands. The garden bloomed with herbs and flowers I had planted, a riot of color visible through windows now framed by curtains I had chosen. Even the kitchen had been renovated, not to erase the memories of cooking meals with Paxton, but to create a space where I could build new memories, entertain friends, nurture myself. As I moved through the rooms greeting guests, I caught glimpses of my journey in their reactions. Surprise from those who hadn't visited since before my illness, approval from those who had witnessed the transformation, and genuine happiness from the inner circle who had supported me through the darkest days. Kayla arrived last, champagne in hand, her smile wide as she surveyed the gathering. "You did it," she said, hugging me tightly. "You really did it." I knew she wasn't just referring to the house. She meant everything. Surviving pneumonia, confronting Paxton, securing my legal rights, rebuilding my life, and finally, finding peace in the aftermath of betrayal. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day, I slipped away from the party for a moment alone on the back porch. The property deed, the document that had ultimately saved me from being displaced from my own life, was framed in my office upstairs. Such a simple thing, a piece of paper with my name alone, yet it had provided the foundation for everything that followed. I thought briefly of Paxton, wondering where he was tonight. Our divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, the final legal tie severed without drama. Agnes, I knew from our limited but cordial communication, had moved to another state for a fresh start. Neither of them had any claim on me anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. A gentle knock on the porch door interrupted my thoughts. It was Robert, who had become not just my attorney, but a friend. "Admiring your domain?" he asked, joining me at the railing. "Reflecting," I corrected with a smile, "on how different things might have been if my name hadn't been the only one on that deed." He nodded thoughtfully. "Legal documents have power beyond their text. That deed gave you leverage when you needed it most." "It gave me more than leverage," I said. "It gave me time, space to recover, to think clearly, to make decisions from a position of strength rather than desperation." Robert raised his glass, in a small toast. "To property rights and second chances?" I clinked my glass against his. "And to unexpected silver linings." Rejoining the party, I was struck by how genuinely happy I felt. Not the cautious optimism of recent months, but true contentment. My health had fully returned. My photography career was thriving, with a solo exhibition scheduled for the fall. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and deepened friendships that would sustain me for years to come. The house that Paxton had tried to claim, that Agnes had briefly invaded, now stood as testament to my resilience. Every room, every object, every decision reflected not just my aesthetic but my journey from illness to health, from betrayal to independence, from victim to victor. I had lost a husband but found myself. And in the end, that was the most definitive triumph of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.